The lawyer cleared his throat, looked at my parents, and said the words that made my mother's coffee cup shatter on the kitchen floor. Actually, the house was never in your name. The room went silent. The kind of silence that has a weight to it, that presses against your ears. My mother's hand was still frozen in the air where the cup had been. My sister Diane's face went white. And my brother Kevin actually stood up, knocking his chair backward. But me? I didn't move. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, watching 11 years of lies collapse in real time. For 11 years, I paid for that house. 11 years of my life, my savings, my sleepless nights. And on that cold November morning, my own family had gathered to throw me out of it. But they forgot one thing. They forgot who signed the papers. Let me start from the beginning, because to understand how I ended up sitting across from a lawyer while my family tried to erase me, you need to understand who I was, who they made me. My name is Margaret. I'm 53 years old, and until that morning, I truly believed that family meant something, that blood meant something, that all the sacrifices I made would one day be seen, acknowledged, maybe even repaid. I was wrong about all of it. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of town where everyone knows your name, your business, and your father's drinking habits. We weren't rich, we weren't poor. We were the family that looked perfectly fine from the outside and quietly falling apart on the inside. I was the oldest of 3, and if you've ever been the oldest child in a struggling family, you already know what that means. It means you stop being a child very early. It means responsibility becomes your middle name. It means you learn to give long before anyone teaches you how to receive. They called me the strong one, the responsible one, the one who never needs anything. I hated those words, because strong was just a polite way of saying, we can take from you and you won't complain. My younger sister Diane was the pretty one, the charming one. When Diane cried, the whole house rearranged itself to make her stop. When Diane wanted something, somehow the money always appeared. She got the college fund, the one my parents swore up and down they just couldn't afford when it was my turn. My brother Kevin was the baby, the only boy, and in my father's eyes, that made him practically royalty. Kevin got the car on his 16th birthday. A used Mustang, sure, but a car. When I turned 16, I got a bicycle and a lecture about the value of hard work. And me? I got words. Beautiful, empty words. Margaret, you're strong. You'll figure it out on your own. And you know what? I did. That's the tragic part. I proved them right every single time. I worked 2 jobs through high school. I bagged groceries at the Shubhi market on weekends. I mean, the food market on Main Street. And cleaned offices at night. I saved every dollar. I put myself through nursing school without a single cent of help from my parents. While Diane was posting photos from her paid-for college dorm, I was studying anatomy at 2 in the morning after a double shift, my feet swollen, my eyes burning. I never complained. Not once. Because I'd learned the family rule early. Margaret doesn't get to need things. Margaret provides them. But here's what nobody in my family ever understood about me. Here's the thing they overlooked, year after year, favor after favor. I remembered everything. Every broken promise. Every "we'll pay you back next month." Every signature on every document I was asked to sign just to help out. I kept it all. Not out of bitterness, at least not back then. I kept it because somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice told me, "One day, Margaret, you're going to need to remember all of this." That voice was right. I became a nurse, a good one. I worked in a cardiac unit for almost 20 years, holding the hands of dying strangers, comforting families who weren't even mine. I was good at caring for people, maybe too good, because caring for people who couldn't care back had been my entire childhood. I got married once, in my late 20s. His name was Robert. He was kind and gentle, and he loved me in a way my family never had. But cancer took him 3 years into our marriage, and I nursed him through every single day of it, right up until the end. When he died, my mother's response was, "Well, at least you didn't have children to worry about." That was the kind of comfort my family offered. After Robert, I threw myself into work. I didn't date. I didn't build a new life. I just endured. And I told myself that was enough. Then, in the fall of 2013, everything changed. My phone rang at 6 a.m., and any nurse will tell you, a phone ringing at 6 a.m. is never good news. It was my mother, and her voice was shaking. "It's your father," she said. "The doctors say it's his heart. And Margaret—" She paused. I already knew what was coming. "We need you." Of course they did. They didn't need Diane, who lived only 20 minutes away with her comfortable life and her comfortable husband. They didn't need Kevin, with his big talk and his empty wallet and his endless business ventures that never went anywhere. They needed me, the strong one, the nurse, the one who could be counted on. And here's the part that still haunts me. I said yes without hesitation. I quit my job in the city, a job I loved, a job with a pension, a career I'd spent decades building, and I moved back into that small house in Ohio to care for the man who once told me I wasn't worth a college fund. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The man who gave my brother a car and gave me a bicycle. The man who called me strong so he'd never have to call me loved. I gave up my entire life to save his. That's who I was. That's who they counted on me being, forever. Moving back into my childhood home at 51 years old is a strange kind of humiliation. The bedroom I slept in as a teenager was exactly the same. Same faded floral wallpaper, same creaky floorboard by the window, same view of the neighbor's fence. It was like the house was reminding me, you never really left. You never really escaped. The first few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and paperwork. My father had suffered a serious heart attack, and the road to recovery, if there even was one, was going to be long and expensive. I slid into the role of caregiver the way you slide into an old coat. It fit too well. That was the sad part. Managing his medications, changing his bandages after the surgery, driving him to cardiac rehab 3 times a week, cooking meals that fit his new diet, bathing him when he was too weak to stand. I did all of it, every single day. And where was everyone else? Diane visited on Sundays. She'd breeze in around noon, stay for exactly 1 hour, take a few photos with Dad for her social media, captions like, "Cherishing every moment with my father," and then leave before dinner. She never lifted a finger. She never asked how I was doing. She'd just kiss Dad on the forehead, tell me the house smelled a little like medicine, and drive back to her perfect life. Kevin was worse. Kevin showed up maybe once a month, and when he did, it was always with an agenda. He'd corner our mother in the kitchen and start talking about money. His latest business needed just a small investment, His truck payment was a little behind. Could Mom help him out just this once? And Mom, who had cried poverty my entire childhood, who couldn't afford my college, always found a way to slip Kevin a few $100s. I saw it all. I said nothing, because that was my wrong. But the real trouble started with the bills. You see, a heart attack in America isn't just a medical crisis. It's a financial catastrophe. The surgeries, the specialists, the medications, the rehab, it added up faster than anyone could have imagined. My parents had some savings, but it evaporated within a few months. Then came the second mortgage they'd apparently taken out years ago, one I never knew about, and the payments they'd fallen behind on. One evening, I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a letter, her hands trembling. It was from the bank, and the word at the top was one that turns your stomach cold. Foreclosure. "They're going to take the house, Margaret," she whispered. "The house your grandfather built. The house you all grew up in." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I don't know what to do. Your father can't know about this. The stress could kill him." And there it was, the moment that would define the next 11 years of my life. I could have said no. I want you to remember that. I could have walked away. It wasn't my mortgage. It wasn't my debt. It was the consequence of years of poor decisions I'd had no part in. But I looked at my mother's face, and something in me, that old, trained instinct to fix everything, to save everyone, took over. "How much?" I asked. She told me the number. It was enormous, more than I had in savings. "I'll figure something out," I said, and her whole body sagged with relief. She grabbed my hands across the table and squeezed them. "You're saving this family, Margaret," she whispered. "You've always been the strong one. We'll never forget this. I promise you on my life, we will never forget what you're doing for us." I believed her. God help me, I believed her. So the next morning, I did what I always did. I went to the bank. I emptied most of my savings, the money I'd been putting aside for my own retirement, for my own future, for the life I'd never quite gotten around to living. It wasn't enough to cover everything, so I did something else. Something that would matter more than I could possibly have known at the time. I took out a loan in my own name, a large one, and I used it to pay off the delinquent mortgage and stop the foreclosure. Now, here's the detail that changes everything. When I sat in that loan office, the officer explained my options. And because I was a careful person, because I'd spent my whole life reading the fine print nobody else bothered with, I made a specific choice about how that money would be structured against the property. At the time, my family didn't ask a single question about the paperwork. Why would they? Margaret was handling it. Margaret always handled it. My mother didn't read a single page. She just signed where I pointed and thanked me with tears in her eyes. They saw a woman saving the family home out of love. What they didn't see, what none of them bothered to look at, was exactly whose name was now legally tied to that house. I didn't do it to be sneaky. I want to be clear about that. In that moment, I did it to protect everyone, to make sure that if anything went wrong, the house couldn't just vanish out from under us. I did it out of love. But love, I would learn, is a one-way street in some families. And the very document I signed to save them would one day become the thing that saved me. For the next few years, life settled into a fragile peace. My father slowly recovered, enough to sit on the porch, to yell at the television, to be his same difficult self. I stayed on as the caregiver, and slowly, the caregiving turned into something else, I became the person who ran the entire household. I paid the property taxes. I paid for the repairs, the new roof, the busted water heater, the furnace that died in the middle of winter. I paid the insurance. I paid for the groceries. Every month, quietly, out of my own pocket. Diane kept posting her Sunday photos. Kevin kept borrowing money that never came back. And my parents kept living, comfortably and safely, in a home that, on paper, though they'd forgotten, I had every right to. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself family wasn't about who paid for what. I told myself that one day they would see everything I'd given, and it would all be worth it. I was such a fool. Because while I was quietly holding that entire family together with my own 2 hands and my own hard-earned money, they were quietly planning how to cut me out completely. And it all began with a whispered conversation in the living room on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. It was a Tuesday. I remember that detail perfectly because Tuesdays were the days I changed my father's compression bandages and refilled his weekly pill organizer. Routine. Ordinary. The kind of day nothing is supposed to happen on. I was in the kitchen making his lunch, a low-sodium soup he complained about every single time, when I heard voices coming from the living room. Low voices. Careful voices. The kind of voices people use when they specifically don't want to be overheard. It was my mother and Diane. I turned off the faucet and stood very still, a wet dish rag frozen in my hand. "She doesn't need to know yet," my mother was saying. "Let's just wait until your father is gone. There's no reason to upset everyone before then." No what? Wait for what? My heart started beating too fast, that cold, prickling sensation crawling up the back of my neck. Then Diane laughed. That soft, careless laugh she'd had since we were girls. The laugh that always got her out of trouble. The laugh that said the world would always bend to her. "Mom, relax," she said. "Margaret won't fight it. You know she won't. She never fights anything. That's the whole point. That's what makes this so easy." I want you to understand exactly what I did in that moment, because it tells you everything about who I was back then. I didn't storm into the room. I didn't demand answers. I didn't throw the dish rag on the floor and scream, "What are you two planning?" No. I did what I had always done. I went quiet. I finished making the soup. I arranged the crackers on the plate the way my father liked them. I carried the tray into his bedroom, and I smiled at him, and I asked if he needed anything else. But something inside me had cracked open, and I would learn, over the following months, that once a crack like that opens in a person, once you finally hear, out loud, what your family truly thinks of you, it never fully closes again. That night, I lay in my childhood bed, staring at that same faded floral wallpaper, and I replayed Diane's words over and over. She never fights anything. That's the whole point. Was that who I had become to them? Not a daughter, not a sister, not the woman who gave up her career and her savings and her entire life to save this family. Just the one who could be counted on to stay silent. The reliable one. The one you didn't have to worry about, because she'd never make a fuss. Something shifted in me that night. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter and far more dangerous. Awareness. For the first time in my life, I started to watch my family. Really watch them. The way I'd spent 20 years watching patients, noticing the small signs that something was wrong long before anyone said a word. And once I started watching, I couldn't stop seeing. I noticed that Diane had started coming around more often, but only on certain days, specific days, and it took me almost 2 weeks to figure out the pattern. She showed up whenever there was an unfamiliar car in the driveway, a silver sedan, a car I didn't recognize, belonging to a man in a gray suit who my mother always ushered quickly into the back study, always when she thought I was busy with Dad. I noticed that Kevin, who hadn't called our parents in nearly 2 years, who only ever appeared with his hand out, had suddenly become deeply interested in helping with Dad's affairs. He started asking my mother strange questions about the house, about what happens to everything, eventually. I noticed that conversations stopped the instant I walked into a room, that my mother started locking the door to the back study, that Diane began treating me with a strange, syrupy sweetness, bringing me little coffees, telling me how much they all appreciated me, patting my arm like I was a loyal dog. You know that feeling when everyone around you knows something you don't? When you can feel the shape of a secret in the room, even if you can't see it? That's how I lived, day after day, in that house I was paying for. And then, one afternoon, I saw the folder. My mother had gone to lie down, and she'd asked me to sort through the mail piling up on the desk in the back study, the room that had been locked for weeks. She was tired. She'd forgotten to be careful. I sat down at that desk, and as I sorted through the envelopes, my hand brushed against something underneath the stack. A manila folder. Thick. Official. I pulled it out slowly. On the front, printed in clean, professional letters, was the name of a law firm, Harrison and Blake, Estate Planning and Wills. My hands went cold. My whole body went still. Every single instinct I had was screaming at me to open it, to finally see what my family had been hiding, what they'd been whispering about, what Diane was so sure I would never fight. My fingers touched the edge of the cover, and then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Fast. Sharp. My mother's. I dropped the folder back onto the desk and grabbed a handful of envelopes just as she appeared in the doorway. Her eyes went straight to the desk, straight to that folder, and her expression changed in an instant. The tiredness vanished. Something harder took its place. "What are you doing in here?" Her voice was sharp, much sharper than sorting the mail called for. "Just going through the mail, Mom," I said, keeping my own voice light. Calm. The same calm I used with dying patients. "Like you asked." She crossed the room quickly and snatched the manila folder off the desk, pressing it against her chest with both arms, clutching it like it was something precious, something fragile, something I was not permitted to touch. "I'll take care of this," she said. "This is grown-up business, Margaret. Adult matters. You go check on your father. He needs his afternoon medication." Grown-up business. I was 51 years old. I was the one who administered his medication. I was the one whose money kept this entire house standing. And my mother was talking to me like I was a child who'd wandered into a room she wasn't allowed in. I stood up. I smiled. I said, "Of course, Mom." And I walked out of that study. But as I walked down that hallway, one question burned itself into my mind. A question I could not shake. A question that would keep me awake for weeks to come. What was inside that folder that my own mother was so terrified to let me see? I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find out. And what I discovered would tear this family apart at the seams. For the next 3 days, I said nothing. I did my chores, I cared for my father, I smiled at my mother across the breakfast table like nothing had happened. But inside, I was calculating. 20 years as a nurse teaches you patience. It teaches you that you don't get answers by demanding them. You get them by waiting, by watching, by being in the right place at the right time. So I waited, and I watched. My opportunity came on a Thursday. My mother had a doctor's appointment of her own that afternoon, her blood pressure, ironically, and Diane offered to drive her. That meant, for the first time in weeks, I would be alone in the house with my father, who slept most of the afternoon anyway. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I went straight to the back study. The door was locked, of course, but I'd lived in that house as a teenager, and I knew every one of its secrets, including the fact that the little brass key to the study desk had been kept in the same chipped teacup on the bookshelf for over 30 years. My mother had never imagined I would look. Why would I? Margaret didn't snoop. Margaret didn't fight. Margaret didn't cause trouble. Margaret was about to. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the drawer and pulled out that thick manila folder. I sat down in my father's old leather chair, took a deep breath, and opened it. And what I read made the blood drain from my face. It was a will. My father's will. Recently drafted, dated just 2 months earlier, by Harrison and Blake. And as I read through the legal language, my eyes searching for my own name, my heart pounding harder with every line, I found it. Once. In a single sentence, buried near the bottom of the second page. To my daughter Margaret, I leave the sum of $1 in recognition that she has already received sufficient compensation for her contributions to this family. $1. Sufficient compensation. I read that sentence 5 times, 10 times. I read it until the words stopped looking like words and became just shapes on a page. $1. That was what I was worth to them. That was the value they placed on 11 years of my life, on my emptied savings, on the loan hanging around my neck, on every sleepless night I'd spent nursing that man back to health. And the rest? The house I had saved from foreclosure with my own money, was to be divided equally between Diane and Kevin. Diane and Kevin. The daughter who visited for photo opportunities. The son who showed up only to beg for cash. They were to inherit everything. And I was to receive $1 and a note telling me I'd already been paid enough. I want to describe to you what I felt in that moment. But the truth is, I didn't feel rage. Not at first. Rage would have been simpler. What I felt was something colder. Something deeper. A kind of grief. The grief of finally, at 51 years old, understanding that the people I had given my entire life to had never once seen me as family. They had seen me as a resource, a tool, a well to draw from until it ran dry. And then, when they thought the well was empty, they were going to throw it away. But here's the thing about grief. If you sit with it long enough, it hardens, it crystallizes, and what it crystallizes into is something far more useful: clarity. I kept reading, and as I turned to the next document in that folder, my grief began its slow transformation into something else entirely. Because behind the will was a second document, a letter actually, a letter from the lawyer, Mr. Harrison, addressed to my mother. And in it, he raised a concern that my family had clearly been trying to figure out how to deal with. The letter read, "As we discussed, before this estate plan can be executed as intended, we will need to resolve the outstanding matter of the property's title and the existing lien. I would strongly advise clarifying the ownership structure of the home, as the current arrangement may complicate any transfer of the property to the other heirs. I read that paragraph very, very slowly, clarifying the ownership structure. The current arrangement may complicate any transfer, and that's when a small, cold smile touched my lips for the first time in weeks. Because you see, my family had a problem they were whispering about behind locked doors, a problem their expensive lawyer had politely warned them about. They wanted to give the house to Diane and Kevin, but the house wasn't entirely theirs to give. They'd forgotten, or maybe they'd never truly understood in the first place, because none of them had ever bothered to read the papers I'd signed all those years ago. The papers I'd structured so carefully in that loan office while they wiped away their grateful tears. When I saved this house from foreclosure, I hadn't just handed them the money like a good little daughter and walked away. No, I had made sure my name went on the title. They couldn't transfer the house to anyone. Not to Diane, not to Kevin, not to a stranger on the street. Because legally, a significant share of that house belonged to me, and had for years. They had been sitting in locked rooms, whispering, plotting, drafting wills, calling lawyers, treating me like a child who wandered into grown-up business. And the entire time, the thing they were trying to give away was partly mine. I closed the folder. I locked the drawer. I put the little brass key back in the chipped teacup, exactly where it had been for 30 years. And I walked out of that study calmer than I had felt in months. Because now I understood the game. And for the first time in my entire life, I understood something else, too. I was holding the winning card. The only question left was when to play it. But I made 2 mistakes that day. 2 mistakes that would nearly cost me everything before this was over. The first was assuming I had more time than I did. And the second was underestimating just how far my sister Diane was willing to go to get what she wanted. Because Diane hadn't been sitting idle, and within a week, she would make a move that would change everything. A move so cold, so calculated, that even I, who thought I finally understood my family, would not see it coming. The move came exactly 6 days later, and it came dressed up as kindness, which is always how the cruelest things arrive in families like mine. It was a Sunday. Diane showed up early for once, not at noon, but at 9 in the morning. And she wasn't alone. She'd brought her husband, Greg, a man who'd said maybe 50 words to me in 15 years, and she was carrying a box of pastries and wearing that soft, syrupy smile I'd learned to distrust. "Margaret," she sang, breezing into the kitchen. "I brought your favorite, the almond ones. Sit down, sit down. You work so hard. Let me make you a coffee." Diane had never once made me a coffee in her life. I sat. I let her. I watched. "So," she said, sliding a mug across the table to me and settling into the chair opposite. "Greg and I have been talking, and we're just so worried about you." "Worried?" I repeated. "You've given up so much," she went on, reaching over to pat my hand, that same dog pat. "Your job, your life in the city, everything. You've been buried alive in this house taking care of Dad for years now. It isn't healthy, Margaret. It isn't fair to you. And we think, Greg and I both think, that it's time you started thinking about yourself for a change." Now, if you didn't know my sister, that might have sounded lovely, caring even. But I knew my sister. And I knew that when Diane started a sentence with concern for me, it always ended with a request for something from me. I waited. "So here's our idea," she continued, brightening, as though she'd just thought of something wonderful on the spot, rather than clearly rehearsing it in the car. There's a lovely little apartment complex over in Fairview, senior-friendly, very affordable. And we thought, what if we moved Dad into an assisted living facility, a really nice one, and you could take that apartment, get your own space back, get your life back. Doesn't that sound perfect? And there it was. Move Dad out. Move me out. Empty the house. I set my coffee down very carefully. And what happens to the house, Diane? For just a fraction of a second, her smile flickered. Just a flicker. But I caught it. 20 years of reading patients' faces, and I caught it. Oh, we'd sell it, of course, she said smoothly, recovering. It's just sitting there, this big old money pit, eating up everyone's resources. Selling it would free up so much. We could use the money to cover Dad's care, and there'd be plenty left over for everyone. She smiled again. For the family. For the family. Meaning for her and Kevin. Meaning the will. Meaning the whole plan I'd read about in that manila folder. They couldn't wait for my father to die. That was the truth sitting underneath all of this. The will named Diane and Kevin as heirs, but the lawyer had warned them the house couldn't be transferred cleanly. So they'd found a simpler solution. Sell the house now, while everyone was still alive, split the cash, and quietly cut me loose with a rented apartment and a pat on the head. It was elegant, in its way. Cold, but elegant. There was just one problem with their plan, and it was a problem they still didn't know about. They couldn't sell the house, not without me, because my name was on that title, and no house gets sold in this country without every owner signing off on it. Diane could plan all she wanted. Kevin could dream about his share. My mother could clutch her folders in locked rooms. But the moment they tried to actually sell, they were going to walk face first into a legal wall with my name written all over it. I could have told her right then. I could have laid my card on the table and watched her face collapse. But I didn't. Because I'd learned something, watching my family all those months. I'd learned that if you show people your hand too early, they simply find a new way to cheat. And I wanted to see the whole plan, every piece of it. I wanted to know exactly how deep this went, and exactly who was in on it before I made my move. So instead, I did something that surprised even me. I smiled at Diane, and I said, "You know what? That does sound nice. I'm so tired, Diane. I've been so tired for so long. Let me think about it." The relief on her face was almost obscene. Her whole body relaxed. Greg actually smiled. "That's wonderful," Diane gushed, squeezing my hand again. "See, I told Greg you'd understand. You've always been the reasonable one, Margaret, the strong one." There it was again. Strong. The word they used so they'd never have to use loved. "When would you want to do all this?" I asked casually, sipping my coffee. "Oh, soon," she said. "Very soon. We've actually already spoken to a realtor, just informally, of course. And there's the lawyer, Mr. Harrison, who's helping us get all the paperwork in order. We just need everyone to sign a few things, and then we can get the ball rolling." A few things to sign. I nearly laughed, because that phrase, "just sign a few things," was the phrase my family had used to get whatever they wanted out of me for my entire life. "Sign here, Margaret. Just sign here. Don't worry about reading it, Margaret. It's just a formality." They had no idea that a signature was exactly what had made this house partly mine in the first place. And they had no idea that this time, My signature was the one thing they would never, ever get. "Of course," I said. "Just let me know when." Diane left that morning glowing with victory. She hugged me at the door, a real hug, the first one in years, and whispered, "Thank you for understanding. This is going to be so good for all of us." I watched her car pull out of the driveway, and as it disappeared down the street, my smile faded, and something hard and cold settled into place inside my chest. Because now I knew. There was a realtor. There was a lawyer. There was a plan already in motion, and I had maybe weeks, not months, before they tried to make me sign my own home away. That afternoon, I went into my bedroom, locked the door, sat down on the edge of my childhood bed, and picked up the phone. I had a call of my own to make. To a lawyer. My lawyer. And that single phone call was about to turn this quiet, obedient, reasonable woman into the last thing my family ever expected her to be: an opponent. His name was David Chen, and he'd been my lawyer since the day I bought my first car in the city, decades ago. A quiet, meticulous man who, like me, believed that the most powerful thing in the world is a piece of paper signed by the right person at the right time. I told him everything. The foreclosure I'd stopped years ago, the loan in my name, the way I'd structured the title, the will, the $1, the lawyer named Harrison, the realtor, Diane's little performance with the almond pastries. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line, and then David said something I will never forget. "Margaret," he said slowly, "do you understand what you're holding?" "Tell me," I said. "You're not a helpless party in this. You're the strongest party in this. When you took out that loan and put your name on the title, you didn't just become a co-owner. You became the person who saved the property from a bank seizure. And there's a paper trail proving every cent came from you. The mortgage payments, the property taxes, the insurance, the repairs. You have receipts?" 11 years of them, I said. I never threw a single one away. I heard him exhale, the sound a man makes when he realizes his client just walked in holding a winning lottery ticket she didn't know she had. "Then let me be very clear," David said. "They cannot sell that house without your signature. They cannot transfer it in the will the way they've written it. And if they try to force you out or push through any sale behind your back, not only will it fail, you would have grounds to pursue full ownership of the property based on your financial contributions. Margaret, you don't just have a seat at this table. You could take the whole table." I sat there on the edge of my childhood bed, staring at that faded floral wallpaper, and for the first time in my entire life, I understood what power felt like. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like stillness, like finally, after 51 years, standing on solid ground. "What do you want to do?" David asked. And here's where I surprised myself again, because a part of me, a small, wounded part, wanted to march into that living room, throw the paperwork on the table, and watch my family's faces crumble. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to feel 1/10 of what I'd felt reading that will. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "I want to do this right. I want every document in order. I want copies of everything. The title, the loan, every receipt, every payment. I want it airtight. And then, I want to wait. I want them to make their move first. I want them to try." David chuckled softly. "You want them to hang themselves with their own rope." "I want the truth to be undeniable," I said. "When this is over, I don't want anyone in this family to be able to say I stole anything, or lied, or schemed. I want it to be so clear, so documented, that they have no choice but to look at what they did. I want them to see it. Then that's what we'll do, David said. Send me everything. I'll have the paperwork ready. And Margaret, whatever they throw at you in the meantime, you don't sign anything. Not a single thing, no matter how they push. Believe me, I said. I won't. I hung up the phone. And I want you to understand, that night, something in me changed permanently. The woman who had spent her whole life saying yes, smoothing things over, keeping the peace, being reasonable, being strong. She was still there. But now, she had teeth, and she knew it. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered everything. Late at night, while the house slept, I scanned 11 years of receipts, statements, and payments. I organized them by date, by category, by property. I made 3 copies of everything, one for David, one hidden in a safe deposit box across town, and one locked in a fireproof case under a loose floorboard in my bedroom. The same loose floorboard that had creaked under my feet when I was a teenager. The house that was supposed to imprison me was now hiding my freedom. And meanwhile, the pressure began. Because I hadn't given Diane a firm yes, she started tightening the screws. It began subtly. A text. Hi, Margaret. Just checking in. Have you thought more about the apartment idea? Then a phone call. Then a visit from Kevin, of all people, who showed up sweaty and awkward and clearly sent by his sister. Hey, Marge, Kevin said, standing in the kitchen, rubbing the back of his neck. So, Diane says you're gonna help us out with the house thing. That's real good of you. Real good. 'Cause, I got some debts, and this'd really help me get back on my feet, and… Kevin, I said gently, Diane told you the house money is already yours, didn't she? He blinked. Well, yeah. I mean, mine and hers. Once we sell and everything's, split up. I nearly felt sorry for him. He genuinely believed it. In his mind, the money was already spent. He'd probably already promised it to someone. We'll see, I said. His face darkened, the first crack in the family's sweetness. What's that supposed to mean, we'll see? Diane said you agreed. She said you understood. I said I'd think about it, I replied evenly. And I'm thinking. Kevin left angry, and within the hour, my phone rang. Diane. Her syrupy voice was gone now, replaced by something tighter, sharper. Margaret, what did you say to Kevin? He's upset. You told me you were on board with this. I told you I'd think about it, Diane. We don't have time for you to think about it, she snapped. And there it was, the mask slipping at last. The realtor needs to list before spring. Harrison already has the papers drawn up. Everyone's counting on this. You can't just be difficult about this, Margaret. Not now. Not after everything. After everything. As if she were the one who'd sacrificed. As if she had emptied her savings and mortgaged her future. I closed my eyes, and I made a decision. Diane, I said quietly, set up the meeting. All of us. You, Kevin, Mom. And bring Mr. Harrison if you'd like. Let's sit down together as a family and go through all the paperwork properly. Every document. Let's get it all out on the table. There was a stunned silence on the line. She'd expected a fight, or more stalling. She hadn't expected eagerness. Really? She said. You mean it? I mean it, I said. Let's put everything on the table. It's time this family saw the whole picture. Oh, Margaret, she breathed, the sweetness flooding back instantly. Thank you. Thank you. I'll set it up for this weekend. You won't regret this. I hung up the phone, and I whispered to the empty room. No, Diane, you will. because they thought they were calling me to a meeting to sign my life away. They had no idea they were walking into the moment everything would finally come undone. They chose Saturday afternoon, the dining room. The same table where, as a little girl, I'd been told to sit up straight and clean my plate and not make a fuss. I dressed carefully that day. Not fancy, just neat. A simple blouse, my hair pulled back, and I carried under my arm a plain leather folder. Nobody gave it a second glance. Why would they? It was just Margaret, being organized, the way Margaret always was. Inside that folder was 11 years of my life. They were all there when I came downstairs. Diane, radiant, practically vibrating with anticipation, a stack of documents fanned out in front of her like a winning poker hand. Kevin, slumped in his chair, arms crossed, still sulking but present because there was money on the line. My mother, at the head of the table, clutching that familiar manila folder against her chest, and beside her, a thin man in a gray suit with silver-rimmed glasses, Mr. Harrison, the estate lawyer, the man who'd been coming and going in the silver sedan for months. My father was not there. He was asleep in his room, unaware that his children were sitting downstairs dividing up his house while he still breathed. That detail alone told me everything about what this family had become. "Margaret, sit," Diane said warmly, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "We're so glad you're doing this with us. I know it's been hard." I sat. I set my leather folder on the table in front of me, unopened, and I folded my hands on top of it. "Now," Mr. Harrison began, sliding a document across the polished wood toward me, uncapping a pen with a soft click. "I'll keep this simple, Ms. Whitfield. This is a listing agreement authorizing the sale of the property, along with a consent form acknowledging the distribution of proceeds as outlined in your father's estate plan. If you'll just review and sign at the marked tabs, we can—" "I have a question first," I said. The pen paused. Diane's smile tightened at the edges. "Of course," Harrison said smoothly. "Whose house is this?" A small silence. Diane laughed lightly. "Margaret, honey, it's Mom and Dad's house. You know that. We're just—" "Are you certain?" I asked. My mother's arms tightened around her folder. Harrison's brow creased, just slightly. The first flicker of professional unease. "Ms. Whitfield," he said carefully, "the property is held in your parents' names, yes. That's the basis of the estate plan." "Then I'd suggest," I said quietly, "that before anyone signs anything, you pull the current title, the actual recorded title, because I don't think you've seen it, Mr. Harrison. I don't think anyone at this table has looked at it in a very long time." The room went still. I opened my leather folder, and I began, one by one, to lay the documents on the table. "This," I said, sliding the first page toward the center, "is the recorded deed to this property, dated 11 years ago. You'll notice 3 names on it: my mother's, my father's, and mine." Diane's smile collapsed. My mother went white. "This," I continued, laying down the next page, "is the loan I took out, in my name, secured by my income, to stop the foreclosure that would have taken this house from all of us 11 years ago. You remember that, Mom, don't you? You remember crying at the bank." My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "And these," I said, and now I laid down page after page after page, a growing fan of paper spreading across that dining table, "are the receipts, 11 years of them, every mortgage payment, every property tax bill, every insurance premium, every repair, the roof, the furnace, the water heater, the plumbing, every single dollar that has kept this house standing, this house you are all sitting in right now, planning to sell out from under me." The documents kept coming. The pile grew and grew until it covered the center of the table, until Harrison had to lean back to make room, until Diane's own neat little stack of papers looked pathetic and small beside the avalanche of my proof. Kevin sat up straight, staring. "Wait," he said. "Wait, what is this? Diane, what is she—" "Be quiet, Kevin," Diane hissed, but her voice was shaking now. Mr. Harrison had gone very quiet. He was a professional. He understood immediately what he was looking at. He picked up the deed. He studied it. He picked up the loan documents. He studied those, too. And with every passing second, his face grew graver, more careful, more alarmed. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at my mother over the rim of his silver glasses. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, and his voice was different now. Cold, formal. The voice of a man realizing he'd been given only half the story. "Were you aware that your daughter's name is on the title of this property?" My mother didn't answer. Her hands were trembling. "Because if this deed is accurate," Harrison continued, "and this appears to be a certified copy, then this property cannot be sold without her consent. And the estate plan you engaged me to draft, the distribution to the other two heirs, none of it can be executed as written. Not legally. Not without her signature." He turned to look at me. "And judging by these financial records, Ms. Whitfield would also have a substantial equitable claim to the property, well beyond her recorded share, possibly a controlling one." The silence in that dining room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Diane's face had gone from white to red to something almost gray. Kevin was looking back and forth between us like a man watching his lottery ticket burn. And my mother finally spoke, in a small, cracked voice I hadn't heard from her since I was a child. "Margaret," she whispered, "how could you do this to us?" And that was the moment. Because after everything, after 11 years, after the $1, after the whispered plotting and the locked doors and the almond pastries and she never fights anything, my mother's first instinct, sitting in the house I had saved with my own 2 hands, was to ask how I could do this to them. I looked at her. I looked at all of them. And I felt the last thread of something old and obedient inside me finally, quietly, snap. I stood up. "How could I do this to you?" I repeated softly. And then, for the first time in my entire life, in front of my whole family, I let them see exactly who I really was. "No, Mom," I said. "The question isn't how I could do this to you. The question is how all of you could do what you did to me and actually believe I'd never find out." I remained standing. And I want you to understand, I did not shout. I had imagined this moment 100 times over those long nights, and in my imagination, I was always screaming. But when it finally came, my voice was calm, steady, almost gentle, and somehow that made it land harder than any scream ever could. "2 weeks ago," I began, "I overheard you, all 3 of you, in this house. You were in the living room and I was in the kitchen, and I heard Diane say, and I quote, 'She never fights anything. She'll do whatever we tell her.'" Diane flinched. "And you were right," I continued. "For 51 years, you were right. I never fought anything. When you needed money, I gave it. When you needed my time, I gave it. When Dad got sick and someone had to give up their entire life to care for him, I raised my hand. I quit my job, I emptied my savings, I mortgaged my future. And I did it without complaint because I actually believed, that this was what family was. That love meant showing up. That if I gave enough, someday it would be seen." I looked at each of them in turn. And then I found the folder. My mother made a small sound. "Yes, Mom, I found it. The will. I know you're leaving me $1. $1 and a little note explaining that I've already received sufficient compensation for my contributions to this family. My voice didn't waver. 11 years of my life, my savings, my career, my youth. And your lawyer wrote it down in black and white, that all of that was worth exactly $1 to you. Harrison, to his credit, had the decency to look at the table. And you, I said, turning to Diane, you were going to sell this house right out from under me. Move Dad into a facility, move me into some little rented apartment in Fairview, pat me on the head, and split the money between you and Kevin. You came into my kitchen with almond pastries and told me you were worried about me. I let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. You were never worried about me, Diane. You were worried I might wake up. And you were right to be. Margaret, Diane started. I'm not finished. The room fell silent again. You know what the cruelest part is? I said. It's not the money. I could have forgiven the money. It's that not one of you, not one, ever thought to check whose name was on this house before you started dividing it up. You never checked because it never once occurred to you that I might matter, that I might be a person with a claim and not just a resource to be managed. You looked right past me my entire life, and that blindness, that's what's costing you now. Because while you were busy underestimating me, I was busy protecting the one thing you all forgot to protect, the truth, on paper, where it can't be argued with. Kevin suddenly slammed his hand on the table. So what, you're just gonna take the house? After everything? That's our inheritance, Marge. Dad wanted? I turned on him, and for the first time my voice sharpened. Kevin, when was the last time you sat with Dad, fed him, changed him, held his hand at 3 in the morning when he was frightened and confused and calling out names? When? Kevin's mouth opened and closed. You don't know what Dad wanted. You know what Diane told you you'd get. There's a difference. He sank back into his chair, silenced. And then my mother spoke again, but this time the accusation was gone from her voice. It had been replaced by something I hadn't expected. Fear. And underneath the fear, shame. We were going to lose the house, she whispered. 11 years ago. We were going to lose everything. And you saved us, Margaret. You did. I know you did. Tears were sliding down her face now. But your father, after the stroke, he wasn't himself. He got so worried about Diane, about Kevin, about them not having enough. And I let him. I let him rewrite it all. I told myself you'd be fine. You were always so strong. You never needed anything. You never asked for anything. And there it was. The whole tragedy of my life, spoken aloud at last by the woman who had authored it. You never asked for anything, so we gave you nothing. I sat back down slowly, and when I spoke again, the anger had drained out of me, leaving something quieter and infinitely sadder behind. That's the thing, Mom, I said. I never asked because I was terrified that if I did, if I ever once stopped being useful, stopped being strong, stopped being the one who gives, you'd stop loving me. So I never asked. And you took my silence as proof that I didn't need anything. But I did. I needed the same thing everyone needs. My own eyes stung now, but I didn't look away. I needed to be loved for something other than what I could provide. Nobody spoke. Harrison had quietly closed his briefcase. The listing agreement sat abandoned in the middle of the table, unsigned, beside the pen he'd never gotten to use. Here is what's going to happen, I said, and my voice steadied again. Because I want to be as clear with you as you all failed to be with me. This house will not be sold. Not now, not against my will. My lawyer has copies of everything you see on this table, and more. If any of you attempt to force a sale, or transfer, or push me out, I will pursue full and sole ownership of this property based on 11 years of documented financial contribution. And Mr. Harrison can confirm I would very likely win. Harrison gave a single, small, grim nod. He wasn't my lawyer, but he was an honest one, and he wasn't going to lie for them. Dad, I continued, stays here, in his home, and I will keep caring for him, not because it's owed to me, not for a house, not for an inheritance, but because I actually love him, which is more than the rest of you can say, sitting here trying to sell his roof out from under him while he sleeps upstairs. Diane was crying now too. Kevin was staring at his own hands. And as for the three of you, I said, rising once more and gathering my documents one by one back into my leather folder. I'm done. I'm done being the well you drink from. I'm done being strong so you can be weak. I'm done asking for nothing and receiving less. I closed the folder. You spent my whole life telling me I never fight anything. I looked around the table one final time, at my stunned sister, my silent brother, my weeping mother. Well, now you know what happens when I do. And I walked out of that dining room, up the stairs, and into my father's room, where I sat down beside him, took his frail hand in mine, and finally, let myself breathe. Behind me, the house was silent, but I knew even then that the silence wouldn't last, because winning the confrontation was one thing. Living with what came after it, the fallout, the fractures, the choice I would have to make about what kind of person I wanted to be, now that I finally held all the power, that was something else entirely. And that choice was coming faster than I knew. They left within the hour. I heard them from my father's room. The scrape of chairs, the low, urgent murmur of Harrison gathering his things, the front door opening and closing. And then Diane's car and Kevin's truck, pulling away one after the other. My mother stayed. She had nowhere else to go. This was her home, too. But she stayed in her room with the door shut. And I let her. That night, sitting with my father, I held all the power I had ever wanted. And I discovered something they never tell you about power. It's heavy. I could destroy them now. That was the truth of it. David had said it plainly. I could pursue sole ownership and very likely win. I could take the house entirely. I could leave Diane with nothing, humiliate her, watch her scramble. I could cut Kevin off from the money he'd already spent in his head. I could look my mother in the eye and give her back exactly what she'd given me. $1 and a note. The idea was intoxicating. For one long, dark night, I sat with it. I let myself imagine it in full detail, the way you press on a bruise just to feel it. And then my father stirred in his sleep and murmured a word. Maggie. My name. The child's version of it. He hadn't called me that in years. The disease had taken most of my name along with most of everything else. But there it was, surfacing from some deep, untouched place. Maggie. The name he'd called me when I was small, and the world was still simple, and I still believed I was loved. I took his hand. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy and confused, searching the dark. I'm here, Dad, I whispered. I'm right here. He looked at me for a long moment. And whether he truly saw me or not, I'll never know. but he squeezed my hand, faintly, and said, "Good girl. My good girl." And then he drifted back under. And I sat there in the dark and wept. Not the bitter tears of the dining room, but something cleaner. Because in that moment I understood what I actually wanted. It was not revenge. It had never been revenge. I wanted to stop being someone who hurt others because she'd been hurt. The whole tragedy of my family was a chain of it, wasn't it? My mother, ignored and afraid, passing her fear down the line. My father, weakened and frightened, trying to protect the children he thought were weakest and forgetting the one who was strong. Diane, grasping. Kevin, drifting. Every one of them acting out of some old wound, passing the pain along like a family heirloom. And now the chain had reached me, and I held the hammer. I could pass the pain along too, swing it down harder than any of them ever had, and call it justice. Or I could be the one who set it down. I made my decision that night, holding my dying father's hand. I called David Chen the next morning. "I've decided what I want to do," I told him. "I'm listening," he said. "I don't want to take the whole house. I don't want to leave anyone with nothing. I want something else." And I laid it out for him. The terms I'd worked out in the small hours, the shape of the thing I could live with. There was a pause. Then David said, "Margaret, I want to be clear. Legally, you could take far more than this. You'd be giving up a great deal." "I know." "You're certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything," I said. "I don't want to win the way they play. I want to win the way I would have wanted to be treated. That's the only kind of winning that lets me sleep at night." He drew up the papers within the week. Then I asked them all to come back. One more meeting, same table. They came warily this time. No pastries, no fanned-out documents. Diane wouldn't meet my eyes. Kevin sat hunched and defensive, braced for the blow he assumed was coming. My mother looked as though she hadn't slept. They fully expected me to bring the hammer down. They expected the $1 treatment, returned to sender with interest. Instead, I slid a single document to the center of the table. "This is a proposal," I said, "from me. You can accept it or reject it, but I want you to hear it out first." I took a breath. "The house stays in the family. Dad lives here, cared for until the end of his life, however long that is. I'll continue to be his primary caregiver, but I want help now, real help. Diane, Kevin, you will each take a share of his care, not money, time. You will show up. You will learn what these last years have actually cost because you're going to spend a little of it yourselves." Kevin blinked. That, clearly, he had not expected. "When Dad passes," I continued, "the house will be sold, not before. And the proceeds will be divided fairly among the three of us, equally, 1/3 each." A stunned silence. "Equally?" Diane whispered. "But the loan, the payments, all those years, you paid for everything. Legally, you could—" "I know what I could do, Diane," I said. "I'm telling you what I choose to do. There are 2 conditions." I held up a finger. 1. The will is rewritten. The $1 clause is gone. I won't carry that piece of paper in the world knowing it exists with my name on it. Not because of the money, but because I refuse to be told, in writing, that my life was worth $1 to the people who were supposed to love me most. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. And 2, I looked at each of them, slowly. You will never again mistake my silence for consent. You will never again treat kindness as weakness or generosity as an obligation, or love as something you're entitled to take without ever giving it back. This, I tapped the document, is not because you've earned it. You haven't. It's because I choose the kind of person I'm going to be, and I am not going to become one of you. The words landed hard, but they landed clean. Harrison, who they'd brought again, perhaps expecting a war, quietly examined my proposal, and then looked up, and I swear there was something like respect in his face. "It's more than fair, Mrs. Whitfield," he said to my mother. "It's considerably more than fair. Frankly, it's more than she's obligated to offer by a wide margin." Nobody signed anything for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, it was Kevin who moved first. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. I don't deserve this," he said, his voice thick. "Marg, I let Diane talk me into. I didn't even think about—" He stopped, swallowed. "I'll do the care days. I mean it. I'll show up. I want to." And he signed. Diane cried. Actually cried, not the crocodile tears of before, but ugly, gulping, ashamed sobs. She signed too, and then reached across the table toward my hand, hesitated, and pulled back, unsure if she was allowed. I let her hand hang there a moment. Then I took it. Not because it was forgiven. Forgiveness, I was learning, is not a single moment, but a long road, and we were only at the very beginning of it. But because holding the hammer had taught me the one thing my whole family never learned: you are always, always free to set it down. The strange thing about setting the hammer down is that it doesn't fix anything overnight. Movies would have you believe the family embraces, the music swells, and everyone is healed by dinner time. Real life is slower. Real life is a Tuesday. The first care day Kevin showed up for, he stood frozen in the doorway of Dad's room, pale as the sheets. He didn't know how to lift him. He didn't know how to change him. He gagged twice and had to step into the hall to collect himself. And I watched my baby brother, the one who'd been so certain of his inheritance, finally, at 46 years old, learn what these 11 years had actually been made of. He came out an hour later, sat down heavily at the kitchen table, and put his face in his hands. "How did you do this?" he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you do this every day for 11 years and never say anything?" "I said something," I told him quietly. "You just weren't listening." He looked up at me. "I'm listening now." And he was. That was the thing. Slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly, Kevin started showing up. He'd get things wrong. He'd forget the medication schedule and I'd have to correct him. But he tried. And trying, I was learning, counts for something. Diane was harder. Diane didn't know how to exist without an angle. The first few visits, I could see her still calculating, still managing, still performing concern. But something shifts in a person when they spend a real afternoon spooning applesauce into the mouth of a father who no longer knows their name. There's no audience for that. No advantage to be gained. It's just love, or it's nothing, and you find out very quickly which one you're capable of. One afternoon I came in from the garden and found Diane sitting by Dad's bed, reading to him from an old book of poems, his favorite, from when we were children. Her voice was soft. She didn't know I was watching, and she was crying, but not the performing kind, the real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere true. She saw me in the doorway. We looked at each other for a long moment. "He used to read this to me when I couldn't sleep," she said. "I forgot. I forgot so much, Margaret." "I know," I said. "I don't know how to say sorry for something this big," she whispered. "Sorry is such a small word." "Then don't say it," I told her. "Show it. Sorry is a word. But this—" I nodded at the book, at Dad, at the whole quiet room. "This is the thing that actually means it." She nodded and turned back to the page and kept reading. My father passed away on a morning in early spring, with the window open and the first warm air of the year moving the curtains. I was holding his hand. Diane was on his other side. And Kevin was there too, having driven over at dawn when I called to say it was close. My mother sat at the foot of the bed. For the first time in longer than I could remember, all of us were in one room, and no one was fighting over anything. There was nothing left to fight over. There was only him, and the leaving, and the strange, holy quiet of it. He didn't speak at the end, but just before, his eyes found mine, and they were clear, clearer than they'd been in months. And he squeezed my hand, that same faint squeeze, and I understood that he knew. Somehow, underneath all the ruin the disease had made of his mind, he knew who had stayed. He knew who had held on. "It's okay, Dad," I whispered. "You can rest now. I've got everyone. I've got them. You can rest." And he did. The grief that came afterward surprised me. I'd expected relief. 11 years is a long war, and I was so tired. And there was relief, yes, but underneath it was a grief so pure and so deep it frightened me. Because I wasn't just grieving my father. I was grieving all the years I'd spent so busy providing that I'd sometimes forgotten to simply be with him. I was grieving the daughter I might have been if I hadn't been so afraid. Diane held me at the funeral. Actually held me. And I let her. The house sold that summer just as we'd agreed. It went to a young family, a mother, a father, 2 small children who ran shrieking through the empty rooms while their parents talked about where the couch would go. I stood in the front yard on the last day and watched a little girl pick a flower from my mother's garden. The same garden I'd tended for over a decade. And I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt free. The proceeds were divided 3 ways, equally, exactly as I'd insisted. Diane tried, at the closing, to give me a larger share. "You earned it," she said. "We all know you earned it." But I refused. "The point was never the money, Diane," I told her. "The point was that we did it right. That's worth more than any extra amount could ever be." She understood. She'd learned that much at least. I was 52 years old when I started my life over. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? Most people at 52 are thinking about slowing down. I was just beginning. With my share from the house, I did something I hadn't done since I was a young woman. I made a choice based purely on what I wanted. I bought a small cottage near the coast, nothing grand, 2 bedrooms, a garden of my own, and windows that faced the water. I'd never lived alone in my entire adult life. I didn't know if I'd be lonely. I braced for the loneliness. It never came. What came instead was quiet and peace, and the slow, astonishing discovery of who I was when I wasn't taking care of anyone. I learned to paint. Badly, joyfully. I took long walks on the beach at dawn. I read entire books in single sittings, something I hadn't done since childhood. I made friends, real ones, people who knew nothing of my history and simply liked me, the person, not the provider. And a strange thing happened with my family. Now that I had stopped being the well they drank from, now that I had drawn a clear, unshakable line, they began, for the first time, to treat me like a person. Diane called just to talk, not to ask for anything, just to hear my voice. Kevin, who'd used his share to finally clear his debts and steady himself, sent me a photo one day of a small business he'd started. A modest thing, but his. Couldn't have done it without you believing I could show up, he wrote. Turns out I can. Even my mother and I found something new. It was never fully repaired. Some cracks don't close, and I've made my peace with that. But she came to visit the cottage one autumn, and we sat on the porch with tea and watched the water. And after a long silence, she said, quietly, I spent my whole life afraid of losing what I had, so I never let myself see what I actually had. And what I had was a daughter who was better than all of us, and I couldn't even see it. She reached over and took my hand. You never asked for anything, Maggie, so let me offer it, just once, before it's too late. I'm proud of you. I love you. And I'm so, so sorry. I cried. Of course I cried. And I forgave her. Not because she deserved it. Forgiveness, I've come to believe, is rarely about what someone deserves. I forgave her because I refused to carry the weight of that anger to the coast, into my little cottage, onto my clean new page. I set it down. Because I was free to. I'm sitting on my porch as I write the end of this, the water going gold in the evening light, a cup of tea cooling at my elbow, one of my terrible, beautiful paintings drying on an easel in the corner. I've had a long time now to think about what happened, about the will, the $1, the folder I found in a drawer that split my life into before and after. And here is what I've come to understand. For 51 years, I believed my value was in what I could give. I thought if I loved hard enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, I would finally earn the place at the table that I so desperately wanted. And the cruelest lesson of my life was learning that you cannot earn love that way. You can only exhaust yourself trying. People who take will keep taking as long as you keep giving, and they will call it your strength while they do it. Real strength, it turned out, was not in how much I could endure. It was in the moment I finally said, enough. It was in learning that no is a complete sentence. That love without respect is just a prettier word for use. That the people who truly love you are the ones who see you even when you have nothing left to offer. And that the ones who only see your usefulness were never really seeing you at all. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're the strong one, the reliable one, the one who never asks, the one everyone leans on and no one leans toward, then I want you to hear the thing it took me half a century to learn. You are not a resource. You are a person. Your worth is not measured in what you provide. You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say no. And you are free to set down the weight you've been carrying for everyone else and finally, pick up your own life instead. They told me I never fight anything. They were wrong. I fought the hardest battle there is. I fought to become myself. And I won. The tea's gone cold. The light's nearly gone too. But there's a warmth in this little house that has nothing to do with the weather, and everything to do with the fact that, at long last, it's mine. I earned this peace, not with $1, with everything I finally had the courage to become. The end.